I don't know what's worse, the lyrical beatdown that Kendrick Lamar is giving to Drake, or the beatdown that Sony is rightfully receiving from the PC community at this moment. But one thing's for sure, both battles are over. Not only did Drake wave the white flag, but so did Sony, and today's video is going to get into exactly what happened, where did Sony go wrong, and how the PC Helldivers 2 community did exactly what they were trained to do: band together for freedom. Up until this point, Helldivers 2 has been the biggest success story of the year alongside other surprise hits like Palworld and Manor Lords, but all it took was one small but huge change to turn that gravy train right back around, and even led to Sony eventually delisting the game from Steam in 177 countries and Valve issuing refunds without really concern for the existing refund window. How did Sony and Arrowhead burn all of this goodwill, you might ask? Well, Sony announced the addition of a required PSN login, but bear with me because this is not simply a story of picky PC gamers being upset that we have to deal with yet another login. First of all, it is worthwhile to note that the Steam page has always said Helldivers 2 requires a PSN login, and in fact, it launched with that login being required. Helldivers 2's success, however, was not expected. The demand of gamers trying to play far exceeded the capacity of their servers, and Sony quickly made adjustments, including disabling the need for a PSN account to play on PC. To make matters worse, Sony has a PSN on PC FAQ, and in that there is a question: do I have to sign into PSN to play a PlayStation game on PC? And up until this past weekend, the answer read: signing into PSN is optional when playing a PlayStation game on PC. That answer has now been changed to say some PlayStation games may require you sign in and link to an account for PSN. None of this changes the fact that there are many people that bought the game in a state where neither Sony nor Arrowhead made it truly explicit to players that they were going to eventually need a PSN account. Sure, there was the notice on the Steam page, but that's easy to miss, and the game itself launches and never asks you for an account, so even if you did see it, you could understand that to be some sort of oversight. While I personally do not mind an external login, and it's actually quite standard on games from virtually every AAA publisher at this point, including, of course, Microsoft, this particular scenario has been especially egregious. First of all, the notice cites safety and security as primary reasons for this update, saying that account linking plays a critical role in protecting our players and upholding the values of safety and security provided on PlayStation and PlayStation Studios games. This is fairly horrendous wording given how often Sony and PSN have had various data breaches. The most relevant breach was in 2011 when Sony was forced to take PSN down for 24 days. More to the point, the breach resulted in the exposure of personally identifiable information for PSN account holders, including unencrypted passwords and date of birth. More recently, in 2023, hackers obtained 1.3 million files from Insomniac Games, revealing Sony secrets and details about yet to be announced games. Thanks to this tenuous history, Sony's claims that account linking protects players just rings incredibly hollow. Moreover, this is the full list of countries where you can create a PSN account. That means if you don't live in one of these listed countries, you cannot create a PSN account, as it would be in violation of their terms of service, and that would render Helldivers 2 unplayable for anyone that lives in an excluded country like Belarus, Philippines, or all of Africa. At this point, these players are likely to have passed the refund window by a wide margin. So what options are left for gamers that spent their hard-earned money on a game that seemingly pulled the rug and altered the deal before the game could even enjoy its third full month of success? Well, public outcry, of course. Naturally, people took to Steam user reviews, as this has consistently been one of the only effective ways for people to voice their concern. They quickly took Helldivers 2 from very positive reception to overwhelmingly negative, with only 14% of recent user reviews giving the proverbial thumbs up. Representatives from Arrowhead were pretty quick to point out that this was Sony's decision, and naturally, most informed gamers likely figured that out on their own. In light of the wave of negative reviews and overall terrible PR, one community manager ended up lashing out in defense of the game they were representing. But before I continue, I'd really like to encourage everyone to not dogpile on this CM. As you are about to see, they've since made better statements, and I'm sure they're already dealing with a lot from so many different directions. Nonetheless, I think it's important to tell this story in full. So first, this community manager said that this isn't the first or even 14th mainstream game to require a third-party account, and that it only takes a minute or two to create. They added that if it's a deal breaker, then you could change your Steam review and make your displeasure known on a platform that counts. In retrospect, and reading between the lines, it seems that this CM and Arrowhead more broadly were fighting with their publisher Sony, and that a wave of negative reviews would actually give them some much needed ammo in their battle for what they thought was best for the gamer. But when they received a message that may have read as a threat, this is what happened next. One user said, "This will kill Helldivers 2, backpedal or lose your player base." In response, the same community manager quipped, "I thought you were refunding and leaving." Now look, I've gotten my fair share of negative comments on this channel, so I know what it's like to have had enough, but at the end of the day, the responsibility of a community manager is to diffuse situations like this, and this response only exacerbates the growing negative perception. Thankfully, this CM made up for this response of theirs. Later they said they were unaware of how many countries didn't have the ability to make a PSN account when they originally made that statement, and that they deeply regret implying it was easy for everyone. They reiterated that the change came from Sony, and so did the poor wording, and so did the change with the FAQ. They go on to say that if a better solution isn't provided for players in region without PSN coverage, then they won't be making that requirement mandatory in those regions. Finally, they point out that the response from the Arrowhead dev team has been universally negative, meaning that they too hate this change and are fighting Sony to see what can be done. Then, after receiving 215,000 negative reviews, Sony delisted Helldivers 2 from Steam in the 177 countries where PSN is not available. This includes countries like Guam, Puerto Rico, the Dominican Republic, and Barbados. Furthermore, Steam has also begun approving refund requests for players even if they've passed the return window. Thankfully, Valve was able to step in for the Steam gamer, which now begs the question of, where does this leave Sony? I think by taking this move the way that they did, Sony made their intentions really clear, as if they weren't already clear. A couple weeks ago, I made a video that included the news about the PlayStation overlay coming to PC, and I said there are some people that are worried about seeing PlayStation expand their PC suite to an overlay and logins, and they expect that Sony will likely create their own store or launcher that competes with Steam on the PC. I think it's evident that at the very least, Sony is looking at PlayStation on PC as a way to bolster the number of users on PSN, which looks really good to shareholders and investors. But of course, the reason that number looks good to investors and shareholders is because those investors believe each of those users could be monetized. So it would seem inevitable to me that Sony is going to look for ways to do just that and monetize those users. We recently learned that Helldivers 2 is already the 7th highest grossing Sony published game in history. We also learned that it's due in large part to the PC platform, where they unceremoniously delisted their own game in over 150 countries. Sony, the holder of one of the biggest digital game stores in the world in their own right, is being forced to, for lack of a better term, bow down to the Steam community. That brings us to just this morning, early this morning, in fact, at midnight Eastern time, Sony tweeted their white flag saying, "Helldivers fans, we've heard your feedback on the Helldivers 2 account linking update, the May 6th update, which would have required Steam and PlayStation Network account linking for new players and current players beginning May 30th. Will not be moving forward. We're still learning what is best for PC players, and your feedback has been invaluable. Thanks again for your continued support of Helldivers 2, and we'll keep you updated on future plans." So that's it, right? PC gamers win. Well, we certainly won the battle, but Sony let the cat out of the bag. They will be back, and if they don't open this game back up to those 177 countries, then you can be sure that they'll be back for this game specifically, and maybe pretty soon at that. This could have all easily been prevented if the publisher and developer were working together instead of Sony just dictating to Arrowhead what needs to be done. Together, they could have come up with a better solution, better messaging, and better timing. But Sony tanked all of the goodwill that Arrowhead built up and harmed Arrowhead's reputation in the process. And all the meanwhile, Arrowhead confirmed that by making our voices heard via Steam user reviews, we were helping them in their goal of righting the ship. Despite that, the active player base remains pretty high, so let's hope that all of this effort is not in vain and that Sony does in fact right their wrongs. I hope you're all having a wonderful week. Decking out. Goodbye.